Hey there everybody, Luke here. Just want to thank you for joining me for this first installment of the Inventor 101 webinar. I appreciate everybody being here, and it looks like we have people from all over the world. So thank you again for deciding to spend a little bit of time to learn about Autodesk Inventor. So this is going to be an ongoing series, right? So we're going to talk about everything you need to do after you've installed Inventor, all the way through creating your first drawing and everything in between. Today we're going to focus on setting up some projects, what do you do with your data, how to work with some templates, and then eventually we're going to talk about sketching, part modeling, some best practices, and all that's going to happen coming up. So let's jump right in and start talking about what you need to do right after you have Inventor installed and some things you need to think about. So the very first thing is the data that you're making. You can store files basically anywhere you want, and a lot of people throw them on their desktop, they throw it into My Documents. Well, Inventor has something called projects that helps you handle this all along the way when you're making your parts and your assemblies and your drawings, and it makes it super easy. So if you go to the upper left-hand corner where it says projects, this is going to open up the projects dialog box, and you can see I have a few there. This is where you create new ones, modify the existing ones that you have. But what I want to do is I want to walk you through how to set up that very first project. I'm going to click New. And we basically have two types of projects you can do. The first one is a single user project. This is great if you are a one-person shop and you don't share your data with any other folks on a team, or if you're a student and you're just kind of working on your laptop or whatever you have. It's a great option. If you're setting up right now and doing this, you can set this up and follow along. The other option is Vault. And I get this question a lot. What's the best way if I'm a single user? Do I install Vault? Do I work with a Vault? Whether you have 20 users or 2 users or 1 user, there's always benefit to using Vault. It helps with managing your data, copying designs, finding things. It's a great addition to Inventor, and I highly recommend that at some point, if not right away, you get a Vault implemented to handle your data. We'll talk about that in a whole nother webinar series, but in this one, we're just going to do a single user. I'm going to name this, we'll call this Inventor 101, and I'm going to call this dash 2 because I've already done this once. I'll choose where I want this or my workspace. This is important because this is where Inventor saves by default and opens files by default. And when Inventor creates assemblies and you're making drawings and it's looking for references, it looks inside of this workspace. So if you start storing files all over the place, Inventor might have a hard time finding those files. So set up a single user project, define your workspace, save your files there, and open your files from there, and you'll have no problems. Also, any files underneath this, so as you start to create a folder structure, it continues to look in that top level folder and anything beneath it. And I will hit finish, and that is basically Data Management 101, super simple to get you started. That becomes my default project by default there. You can see what the location is. Now what I want to do is talk about this home dialog box that pops up by default. So this is where we manage our projects. This is where we open and search our most recent documents we've worked on. And the most important thing here for today is going to be this new section right here. So this is new parts, assemblies, drawings, presentation files. And again, this is a 101 class, so a part file. This is a single part file. Pretty self-explanatory. Assemblies, these could be top-level assemblies, sub-assemblies, basically any collection of components and or assemblies start here. Drawing files, these can be inside of the Inventor file format, or it can be a DWG file by default. And then presentations, if you're doing technical documentation, or if you're doing exploded views or animations where you want to show assembly, that's where we work with presentation files. A couple things to think about here inside of the new. is you may want to change from inches to millimeters by default. If I happen to click a new part right now, it's going to create a millimeter part. And if that's what I do all the time, that's great. But if it's an inch component, I have to go in and I have to switch that. You can switch that right here. Just select it and hit OK. I'm going to stick with millimeters because that is what I use every day. You could also, if you expand this enough, you can see it disappears and it tells you expand to show advanced templates. I can actually access anything I want. If I just pick on this expand, I can go to English, metric, mold design, sheet metal parts, you name it, everything's in there. But the basic ones that you get to are going to be stored right here, and we're going to jump right into our very first part file. So just a little bit of information about the user interface. Whenever I say browser, I'm referring to this panel along the left-hand side of the screen. This is where everything gets stored inside of Inventor when you're building your parts, your assemblies, and your drawings. And it's chronological, so the way you built it from the beginning to the end, this is where you go to edit, you can reorder things. So a lot of stuff is going to happen in this browser as you build more complicated components and more complicated assemblies. The ribbon runs along the top. These are the active commands. And when you change, you can go 3D model, sketch, annotate, and so on and so forth. This changes automatically for you. So if you're in a 3D modeling mode, it switches to 3D modeling. If you're in a sketch, it shows you the sketch. You can bounce back and forth if you want, but Inventor typically presents itself with the best possible tools that you need at the time. And then this is obviously our user interface. In the upper right-hand corner, you have your orbiting widget, whatever you want to call this, a view cube, I think is the technical term. This is a way to navigate. I highly recommend, if you don't have one, get yourself a 3D space mouse. They make you so much more efficient. I don't know how I managed in the past without one way back in the day. I've been using one for a long time, but these really help with viewing, orbiting, getting just the right view, and there's lots of ways I'll show you here in a minute that you can do that if you don't have a 3D space mouse, but they are invaluable. They pay for themselves literally in a couple of minutes. So before we jump into some parts and making stuff, we need to talk about some settings. And there are different settings. There are application options that go all the way across the application. And then there's individual document options that travel with the file. So if we go to application options, there's a whole ton of stuff here. You can see there's lots of tabs, lots of options here. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these. What I do want to talk about, though, is the color tab. And this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, but it's a tip I gave last week. And make sure that your color scheme is set up to be one gradient color. So don't have a gradient background that goes from light blue to dark blue or whatever the gradient is. Here's why. When you're creating technical documentation, you're doing screen grabs for PowerPoints, whatever you happen to be doing, when you're snapping those screenshots in Inventor and you want to clean those up to drop them into a PowerPoint or into a presentation or a technical document, it's really difficult to clean up. If you set your background to a solid color, I could care less which one you do, but now whenever I set it to one color and I go into, let's say, Snagit, and I want to set my background to transparent, I can make the entire background transparent with a single click. Super easy, super fast. So at a minimum, make your background a single color when you are creating those snapshots, again, for PowerPoints, technical documentation, whatever you might be doing. I happen to use a background image, and I use a fusion gray image, I call it. That's because I do a lot of images in Fusion and I do images in Inventor, and it makes it easy whenever the images match. So whatever you want to do there, just make sure it's a solid color. Couple options underneath the display tab are next. Depending on the hardware you have, you may need to make some adjustments. If you have some really good hardware, you can typically push these things on the high end for display quality. If you have kind of not as good hardware, you may need to bump down things like display quality to rough, medium, smooth, whatever it might be. I like to take the defaults for most of this. There's only a handful of things that I typically change, and the reason is every time you get a new release or you're training a new employee or you have a new person at the company that's going to start running Inventor, you got to go in and you got to change all these settings, and it's just not an easy or fun thing to do. You can import and export these settings from one to another, but I don't know a ton of people that have ever done that. So, but you can. So if you do totally customize this, you can go in and you can export those settings and then import them for your new computer, your new installation, for a new user, you name it. And that is about it on the application options. Just that color is an important one. And then there are some document settings, and basically these are things like the units you're using, what your object snaps, and your grid spacing is. Again, you can go in and adjust those all you want. So let's jump right in. We're almost 10 minutes in and I haven't modeled anything. That is not good, so let's start modeling. I'm going to expand out my origin in the browser, and I'm going to turn the visibility on of my origin plane. So this is super important. This is 0, 0, 0. Anytime you're modeling a component, you have to build that component in relationship to 0, 0. If you don't do this, number one, when you go to put this into an assembly, things get inserted into assemblies based off of where their 0, 0 point is, and it could be flying off in space and not very easy to actually insert into an assembly. Also, when you build things on 0, 0, 0, it makes it super easy to reuse these origin planes if you have symmetrical components. You can mirror things right to left, top to bottom, front to back. It makes everything easier, trust me. So people say, well, I have a part that is a very unusual shape. It's not symmetrical. Whatever your issue might be, if there isn't a logical 0, 0, 0 point, pick a point that is the most logical, wherever you can find it. Maybe it's a bolted connection where this piece then connects to something else. Make that your 0, 0. That way when you bring it into the assembly, it has a nice location and connection point for insertion. So a couple of things here that I want to highlight is I just hit F6 to take me to my isometric view. So if you hit F6 on your keyboard, that takes you to a default isometric view. And I mentioned orbiting before. You can pick on this view cube and pick different orientations, and it will orient wherever you want it to be. You can pick and hold on the view cube, and it actually does some rotating. It's a little wonky when you're up there doing it. Probably the easiest way to do it if you don't have a space mouse, if you press and hold F4, it brings up your orbit on screen, and now I can orbit by picking inside that orbit. I can rotate by picking outside. I can pick one of these axes and go right to left and or top to bottom. If you get turned around or upside down when you're doing this, just hit F6 and it takes you back to the default. So let's do our first sketch. So our very first sketch is going to be on this XY plane. I could issue the sketch command, but if you hover over any command inside of Inventor and you see that little parenthesis S, that is the shortcut key for Inventor, and I've been using Inventor for years and years and years. I've been using AutoCAD since I think release 12, and I'm a typer, and I don't care what just about anybody says. Typing is faster than hunting and finding, you know, mini toolbars, gesture base, whatever it is. If I can hit S for sketch and it issues the command, it's faster. So anytime you see one of these, so S for sketch, L for line, some of these aren't as easy. Control Shift C. You can totally customize these, and we'll talk about that in a webinar down the road. But as much as you can, use the shortcut keys. It makes you super fast and efficient. So I'm just going to hit S. You don't have to hit S, enter. You just hit S, and it launches the sketch command. I pick where I want to do my sketch, and Inventor rotates the screen and points it right at me. So now what I'm going to do is issue my circle command. Inventor also automatically, again, this is one of those defaults, excuse my ringing phone, it automatically projects that 0, 0, 0 point for me. So I can pick that center point. And this is where you should dimension as you go. I could place the circle and dimension after the fact, but if you see that dialog box, I can type in 12, and it will give me a 12 millimeter diameter circle. I'm going to hit F6 to go back to an isometric view. And again, shortcut keys are the way to go. I'm going to hit E for extrude. It's going to issue my extrude command. I don't have to hit enter. I don't have to hunt up inside of the toolbars there. This is going to be a symmetrical extrusion. And another thing, whenever you have these dialog boxes open, you can see in the lower left-hand corner of just about every single dialog box, there is a help or a question mark icon there. This will take you to the help and give you all the minutia details that you want about that individual feature. I recommend the help a lot. It's really good, very detailed. So make sure if you have any questions on how to use a feature, that'll really walk you through it in great detail. I'm going to do a symmetrical, like I said, and this is going to be a total of 13.5 millimeters. So it's going to go 13.5 total, so it splits the difference. And there is my very first 3D feature. If you notice in the browser now, I have a feature, and then underneath that feature I have a sketch. That's how Inventor stores information. The sketch that was used to create that feature gets moved into that extrusion, and so on and so forth. You could, if you wanted, right click on this, and you could rename these particular features. If I wanted to call this, whatever it happened to be, my center component. This is good when you have really complicated parts that have lots and lots and lots of features. If you name them as you go, this is a tip, it makes it easier to find that particular feature. That is, of course, if you remember why you named it what you named it. So, personal preference, I typically don't unless I have really complicated components, or you can just name one of the features that you want to remember for some reason. You don't have to rename them all, just one that is maybe an important one that you change a lot, you could name and find easily. I'm going to issue my sketch command again. I'm going to pick this XZ plane. Inventor automatically rotates. Another thing you're going to notice is Inventor is still in this isometric view. So you see it looks a little wonky because it's actually, there's a vanishing point in this model. So whenever I go to sketch now, it's a little off. If you right click on your home key in the upper right hand corner and I do perspective with ortho edges, what that does is anytime I'm looking at this orthographically, front, top, right, bottom, all the default orthographic views, it flattens it temporarily. So if I hit F6, it's an isometric view. If I go to my front view of this, it flattens it. Really nice way to adjust this. I didn't know about this for the longest time, and I think someone on social media pointed it out, and it totally changed the way, because I used to always shut it off temporarily, so this happens automatically now. Great feature. Again, right click on the home key, ortho with, or perspective rather, with ortho faces. I'm going to hit F7 now. What F7 does is that slices my graphics wherever my sketch is. Remember, I put that sketch on this plane, so this is right where I'm working. Go back to my front view of this. I'm going to use a command called project cut edges. So anything that intersects this plane, any geometry, it's going to project. So you can see it projects all 4 edges of this cylinder now. And I don't want to use this geometry for creating anything. This is construction so that I can line things up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a window over this, and I'm going to turn it to construction. That way Inventor doesn't try to use it as a feature for extruding or revolving. So for example, if I try to extrude something now, I basically get an error message that says, hey, you have nothing to extrude. That's because it's construction. So now what I'm going to do is start to sketch. I'm going to do a 2-point rectangle. And those of you that may be using AutoCAD or you haven't used Inventor a ton, we have something called constraints in AutoCAD. They call them O-snaps or ortho snaps. So I'm going to snap to this midpoint of this line, and I'm just going to eyeball it to there. Now I'm going to add my dimension. The escape key is going to be probably worn off on your keyboards eventually. Escape cancels anything running inside of Inventor basically, and that gets you out of the command so you can issue the next one. I'll hit D for dimension, and from this edge to this edge, whoop, helps if I pick the right edges. From this edge to this edge is going to be 3 millimeters. And you can see this hanging out down here. I want this line to line up with this exactly. So I'm going to use a coincident constraint from this point to that line. So you'll notice the geometry changes color. In the lower right-hand corner, it also tells you that it's fully constrained. So Inventor knows when you still have to add either additional dimensions or constraints. So keep an eye on that lower right-hand corner as you're creating your sketches. It's kind of a helper there so that you can make sure you're creating fully defined sketches, because you always want to fully define your sketch 99.99% of the time. We'll continue sketching here. So I'm going to go to my line command, hit Escape L. Got out of the dimension command or the constraint. I'm going to basically snap to that point. And again, here is the dimension as you go. I could just draw the line and dimension it later, but I know this line is 18 millimeters. I'm going to hit the tab key, and it's going to switch to the angle option now. And this is 128 degrees. I hit enter. So I basically drew the line and dimensioned it at the same time. Super easy. Next is some gesture-based drawing. So I'm still in the line command, but I want an arc at the bottom of this, a little lobe. If I pick and hold, starting on that endpoint, depending on which direction I drag, I'm going to get an arc. You can see now I'm keeping the button held down, the left button. So if I come off and down and around, it takes me right into a tangent arc. I'll stop there and connect to that endpoint. You can see that I need a few dimensions there. It says 2 dimensions needed. My geometry is a different color. I will add a tangent constraint. So if I go up to my constraints, I'll pick tangent in that circle or that arc in that line or tangent. I still need one more. Escape D to get out of the command and get to dimension. And this is going to be 3.5 millimeter radius. All my geometry changes colors, and you can see I am fully constrained. I'm going to hit F6 to go to my isometric view. E for extrude. Pick my 2 profiles that I want to work with. I'm going to do that mid-plane extrusion again at 3 millimeters. Now is a good time to save. So Inventor does not have, at least I don't think it does, an autosave. So you want to make sure that every now and then you save your file. So I'm going to call this part 3 since I did this a little bit earlier today. So now my part file is saved. I could shut these origin planes off, but I want to keep them on because I'm adding some more features. So I'm going to do my sketch, S for sketch. This time I'm going to build it on the XZ plane. I'm going to slice my graphics again, F7. And this time I just want this edge. I'm drawing a circle right here, and it needs to be at the midpoint of the side of that cylinder. So instead of project cut edges, I'm going to do project geometry, and I'm going to pick that edge right there. Hit escape. I'm going to do a window over top of it, and I'm going to make that construction because I don't want Inventor to think I want to do anything with it other than use it for construction purposes. So now I'm going to issue my circle command. I'm going to snap right to that midpoint. And here's, if you're not dimensioning as you're going, here's the process that you would go about. And that's fine. Some people like to dimension all the way at the end. I think it takes a little more, but I basically draw the circle. I kind of eyeball it however big I want it to be. Get out of the circle command, and then I can issue the dimension command here, or I could hit D for dimension, pick the circle, place the dimension, and then 6.5 millimeters. So it's definitely a couple of extra steps. So as much as possible, dimension as you go. Sometimes you don't know your dimensions. You're just kind of freestyling your design. Maybe you don't know exactly what it needs to look like, and that's totally fine. But at some point, you want to make sure that your models are fully defined, fully constrained. That way, you don't run into problems down the road with them. I'll extrude this, and this is going to be a mid-plane extrusion, and it's going to be a total distance of 14.5. So again, it splits that difference. And now I'm going to shut the visibility off of these origin planes. I'm kind of done using them now, so I'll just right click in visibility. So I get the question a lot, where do you put the information? Do you put all the information in the sketch? Do you make multiple features? And this is just the best practice that I've been using ever since I started using Inventor years and years ago. Make your models the way you would actually make it in real life. So more than likely this would probably be some type of casting or machining, and I'd start with kind of this lump void that you see here, and then you're going to add your fillets and your chamfers and your holes. So I typically keep my sketches simple, just enough to get the feature that I need, and then I add in the information later on with intelligent features. So again, I could draw a circle and extrude this through, and that's an extruded circle. That's not a hole. Inventor treats those things differently. So what I'm going to do is, rather than creating simple or more complicated sketches rather and adding holes, I'm going to use features. So the rule of thumb, keep your sketches simple if you can, and use features to create your geometry. That way you have a little more control over it. So I'm going to issue the hole command. And lots of options here. Again, there's some help in the lower left-hand corner. I'm going to do a concentric placement because these are all going to be centered on all these other circles and all these other circular faces. So I'm going to pick this side plane here. The concentric reference comes up by default. It needs to be centered on that face, and it's a 3 millimeter, and it goes all the way through. If I hit OK, it issues the command and then closes the whole command. But if I hit apply, it issues it, and I stay in it to create additional holes. So I'll pick this face, that concentric reference. This time it is an 8 millimeter hole. I'm going to hit apply. And this next hole is a tapped hole. So I can change the type of hole here at the bottom to a tapped hole. I can choose the thread type. This is going to be an ANSI metric M profile. And it's going to be a number 7. Got to get the right size there. An 07 rather. Oop, I have my size wrong. Let's do a 7. Why can't I get my size done here correctly? Ooh, it's a 4. That's why. It's a 4 by 07. It's going to be concentric reference on this face right here. I can do a right-handed or a left-handed. Now, whenever I do this component, it doesn't actually model the threads there. You can see that these are what are called cosmetic threads. But when I do a drawing of this, all that intelligent information for these through holes and this tapped hole are automatically captured whenever I go to add hole notes and those sorts of things. So make sure you use features the right way. We're going to add a couple of fillets, and we should be wrapping up here in a few minutes. So here's a tip for fillets. Again, if you can, do them at the end. The reason is, if you add your fillets during the process of creating your models, you may need that edge to dimension from or constrain to or to do something with, but if you've filleted that edge, you don't have it anymore. You might need to project some extra geometry or do some kind of workaround because you don't have an edge there. So I highly recommend, as much as possible, do your filleting at the end of your design. And then another tip, and I've been doing this one for years, is do your fillets in order from smallest to largest if you can. And we've all been there. You're filleting this super complicated component. There's tons of different fillets that are all running into one another. And you go to add your last fillet and it won't take. And then you undo the previous fillet and try it. It doesn't work. And you undo your previous fillet and you try it. Again, this is something that has served me for years and years and years running Inventor. If you do them from smallest to largest, you tend to have better success of getting all of those fillets applied. Sometimes you can't help it and you have to do it in a different order, but just keep that in mind. Do your fillets last and do them in order from smallest to largest if possible. There's always reasons why you can't, but if possible. So we'll add some fillets. Again, our help's in the left-hand corner. We'll add a fillet to that edge right there. And this is going to be a 3mm fillet. Again, I'm going to hit apply rather than OK. I'm going to pick this edge, and I can pick right through a part. I don't have to rotate around if I don't want to. You'll see Inventor lets me pick right through to pick that edge. This fillet here is going to be 4.5. And my very last fillet is going to be on this edge right here. I'm going to rotate around to grab this one, and it is going to be 6mm. I'm going to hit apply, F6. And this whole time I've been working on this gray file, and I'm kind of mad at myself for doing that, because this is something I always tell people. It's a pet peeve. Don't work with gray on gray on gray on gray. That's no fun. Make your parts look good on the screen. After all, you're the one staring at this all day long, right? So don't just have gray on gray on gray. Take your parts, change them to be some cool color that looks great when you do screenshots or screen grabs. You could make them realistic versions of the materials. I tend to not go realistic. I do a lot of gold. This is one of my more favorite colors inside of Inventor. I think it makes your parts look really good. It looks really nice with the highlighted edges. Again, personal preference. And then the very last thing I want to do is I need to add a small chamfer to this inside edge right here. So I'm going to issue my chamfer. I'm going to pick that edge. This is going to be a 1mm chamfer. And that is our steering knuckle. If you didn't know what it was, some of you may have seen this one before. This is an oldie but goodie that we've been using on and off over the past couple years. But that's the steering knuckle, soup to nuts. So thank you again for sticking around, and I hope that those of you that are new to Inventor, you got some really good direction on how to start using it. Make sure you manage that data correctly. Don't just store stuff anywhere. You'll run into problems later on with that. Think about implementing Vault right away if you're not already doing it. Leverage the help as much as you can. It's definitely something that comes in handy for me when I'm not exactly sure how to use a particular feature. The next thing is, this isn't a replacement for training. As good as I hope this is for you, we have resellers and partners out there that do amazing hands-on live face-to-face training with you if you want to do it that way, where you get in-depth, really in-depth training on how to use Inventor. So reach out to whoever you're partnering with to buy your software and get training. A trained user is a happy user. Also, you could think about using an online company, perhaps like Lynda or Pluralsight. These are companies that do online software training. They all have really great Inventor beginning and advanced classes. So get yourself trained to make sure that, again, that trained user is a happy user. Also, here are a few resources that you might be interested in. We have the trial for Inventor available if you're not already running Inventor. The trial is a great way to start. We also have a resource center that you might be interested in. We have the help, we have the forums, all kinds of information for you to get connected to that Inventor community and ultimately use Inventor the best way possible. Also, if you are happy with what you heard today, I invite you to subscribe and like and follow me on social media. This is going to be a weekly occurrence. I'm going to have tips and tricks and all sorts of stuff coming out every day of the week, and I hope you follow. And thanks again for checking out this Inventor 101 webinar.